grades 5 and 6, it's teacher Kate. Welcome back to online learning. We are starting week 3 with an experiment. So I gave you the information. In week 2, we are going to be doing an ice race experiment. Our question for this experiment is going to be, what melts ice the fastest? So we are going to look at ice and adding 3 different substances. Which one will melt ice the fastest? We are looking at the scientific method again. So we want to use all 6 steps of the scientific method to look at our experiment today. Remember, you can do this experiment at home also. I gave you some materials to use, and I am going to use 3 different materials. So you will be able to follow the same steps using 3 different substances to add to an ice cube. So what we're going to look at today is, we already know step 1, the question. What melts ice the fastest? That is the first step of the scientific method. Step 2 is research. So we want to gather information about our materials and what we are going to use to do the experiment. Our 3 materials for the experiment. We are using flour, right? So a baking ingredient. We know that flour is made out of grains and corn. It is a powder. Our second substance we are going to be using to add to ice is coffee grounds. So we know that coffee grounds come from a plant and a bean that has a lot of minerals in it. Our third substance is electrolyte powder. So maybe if you have seen a package like this in 7-Eleven or at the pharmacy, these are electrolytes. They are made out of salt and sugar. So we know that that is what substance 3 is made out of. That is our research for the experiment. Looking at these substances, which one is going to melt ice faster or even slower? So what we have to think now is what we think is going to happen. That is the hypothesis, step 3 of the scientific method. Remember, for the hypothesis, we want to use the words I think. We fill in what we think is going to happen, and we say because. So why do we think that is going to happen? So if I'm doing this experiment, I am going to make a hypothesis. My hypothesis is, I think the flour will melt the ice cube the slowest, because flour is made out of a grain or corn, which is similar to wood, and wood helps insulation for products. So that is my hypothesis. The 4th step of the scientific method is the experiment. We first have to look at the materials and the procedure to do the experiment. Our materials for the experiment include 3 substances. So if you do this experiment at home, you can use different substances. You do not have to use the same substances I use. We also will have to use 4 ice cubes. We are keeping them in the freezer now so they do not melt. And we will also have to use a measuring spoon. This is a measuring spoon of 1 teaspoon. We will use this to make sure we put the same amount of each substance onto the ice cube. And lastly, I just have some water here to make sure I have a clean spoon every time I get a new substance. And those are the materials we will need for the experiment today. For the procedure, my grade 5 and 6 students, you will be able to find the written procedure in Google Classroom on our PowerPoint. So I am not going to go through every step of the experiment, but you can see and remember the procedure are the steps that I follow to do the experiment. So I will do it today here, you will see my procedure, and you will be able to do it at home. Okay, so let's get started with our experiment. All right, so now we are ready to set up the experiment. We have our ice in our ice tray. We want to make sure we put 1 ice cube of the same size in each of our cups that we are going to use. So we will put 1 ice cube in each cup. Also, if you can, it is good to make sure only one thing in our experiment is changing, right? In our PowerPoint last week, the things in our experiment that change are the variables. The things that stay the same are the controls. Things that we are going to keep the same: the size of the ice cube and how it sits in the glass. You want to try to keep that the same. We want to use the same amount of substance that we will add to the cup. I will use 1 teaspoon to keep the amount the same. So our first cup is flour. I am going to sprinkle it right on top of the ice cube if I can. And then make sure your teaspoon is clean to go into the next substance. Cup 2, coffee. I will put it right on the ice cube as much as I can. We will clean it to make sure we don't have other substances. And the last one is the electrolyte powder. That will be cup 3. Our final cup is a control. It is an ice cube with nothing added. We will let that melt on its own. What I want to do now is start the timer. We want to see how many minutes it takes for the ice cube to melt. So everybody should start recording. All right, so for our experiment, the controls in the variables for this part of the experiment are a little bit confusing and something that is hard to understand. So I want to talk about our controls for our experiment. If you can remember from the scientific method, these are the things that stay the same. So our measurement tool that we measured the substances with, this was to make sure the same amount of substance gets added to each ice cube. We also use the ice cube tray. That means each ice cube is the same size. We don't want these things to change, or we do not have a successful experiment. Lastly, we wanted to start the timer at the same time to try to measure them all for the same amount of time. Those are controls. Variables are the things that change in the experiment. We have 2 variables, independent variable and the dependent variable. The independent variable is what I choose or you choose to change. So I picked these 3 substances to change and put on the ice cube. You can pick 3 different substances. So that is the independent variable. And the dependent variable is what we are measuring or what we are recording. And that was time. We cannot decide how long each ice cube will take to melt. We just have to record and measure it. That is the dependent variable. After our experiment is finished, we have our results. You will have this chart on your Google Classroom slide. So if you do this experiment, you will have maybe 3 different substances at the top. You will always have the control group where nothing is added, but these 3 may change. That is up to you, what you choose. We will be recording time. So I have the label and units for minutes. So how many minutes did it take for the ice cube to melt fully? When we talk about melting, remember that is a solid changing into a liquid. How long did it take for the ice cube to melt? You will write a number here on each line on the PowerPoint. And lastly, our last and final step for the scientific method is the conclusion. This is the 6th step of the scientific method. The conclusion is where we answer the question, which was step 1. We want to find an answer to the question. And we want to know, why did it happen? So In the conclusion, you will answer, what substance melted ice the fastest? So in a sentence, you can tell me, the blank substance, whatever you added to the ice, melted the ice the fastest. You can also tell me what substance melted ice the slowest, right? So in a sentence, the blank substance melted ice the slowest. And also in the conclusion, you will tell me, was your hypothesis correct or incorrect? It is okay to have an incorrect hypothesis. That's how scientists learn, and it is okay to be wrong. You just have to say incorrect or correct. And looking at the research and information, you can give a reason why you think what happened in your experiment. All right, so that is our full experiment for today. You will be able to do this at home. You can use the same substances as me or something else. That is up to you. I have a PowerPoint and Google Classroom for my grade 5 and 6 students. If you would like to go ahead and do this experiment at home and share your results with the class, that would be awesome. All right, good luck. If you have any questions, be sure to message me on Google Classroom.